Hey guys, it's Heather from Here She Grows, and today I'm working in the vegetable garden, and to be totally honest with you, I'm exhausted and kind of relieved that it's quitting time. I've been going back here since March, so I did a video back in, I think it was in early March when I built those low tunnels so I could extend my growing season, and I've been harvesting from this space, all these raised beds since March, and it's been nonstop, so I'm ready to shut things down and take a breather. But I wanted to tackle winter squash and show you how I determine when it's time to harvest, how to cure them, and then the other things that I do in addition to picking all of the tomatoes, which if you remember from that video I did a couple weeks ago where I topped all of my indeterminate varieties to force all of that plump fruit to ripen up in time before the frost hits, which we're due like around October 15th for my zone. All of those tomatoes have colored up. So I'm going to pick those, and then my husband was like, make sure you pick all the jalapenos, because really all he cares about are the jalapeno peppers. So we're going to pick all of those. And then I also learned something, in addition to my family requesting that I no longer grow any more zucchini because we have zucchini coming out of our ears, we're over the eggplant too. I planted a variety that was so prolific. I planted just 2 plants, and they were so productive that, I mean, I don't know what else to do with the eggplant. We're all kind of over it. So I learned that I only need 1 plant from this particular variety because it is that productive. But I wanted to show you how I go and revive the soil, because the soil, when it's been growing so hard for, since March, you got to replenish those nutrients. And I'm going to show you exactly what I do to help the soil along so that it's got time to replenish and revive for next year. But first, I'm going to pick all of these beautiful tomatoes and then clear everything out and then move on to the next step. And if you're only interested in one part of this video, I'm going to timestamp everything so that you'll know exactly where to go for the information that you're interested in. But first, let me get after the tomatoes. Remember how green all of these guys were? I mean, all of these clusters were just plump green fruits. Topping them, and then the lower temperatures, cooler nights, everything's coloring up beautifully. So now I can go ahead and start picking. These are my favorites. These are sun golds, and they're, I just brushed my teeth, so a little bitter, but still kind of good. Anyway, everything's colored up, and so there won't be any waste. I've got a lot of nice plump fruit on here, and I'll probably leave these vines up a little bit longer because they're still going to produce fruit. I mean, we're a few weeks out from our first average frost, so I'm just going to pick what I can right now and then go after the peppers. Not bad. Now, this is the eggplant I was talking about earlier when I said I had to really change the quantity that I was going to plant. And you definitely learn these things as you go along. I'm distracted by, we've got a lot of Cooper's hawks flying around right now. Anyway, so as you grow new varieties or new to you varieties, certain plants will produce so much fruit, like these eggplants. There's just a lot of overripe eggplant. But when you've got a plant that produces 30 or more eggplants per plant, and you're only a family of 4, you don't need 2 plants, which is what I grew from seed. I did 2 plants and thought, okay, that's probably going to be enough. Well, it was more than enough. So you kind of learn that as you go. But I am just going to cut these guys down and compost them. They are a white variety. You'd never know it. They've turned yellow because they're overripe. But it's a variety called Icicle, and it was an All-America selection, so they were seeds that were sent to me, trial seeds, and they were definitely prolific. And it's just, they produce so much, way too much, way more than we could actually use. If you're thinking about planting eggplant, specifically Icicle, and you're a family of 4, probably 1 plant's going to work for you. It's like, oh, I didn't plant cucamelons, but you know what? I had cucamelons in this bed last year. They're also called mouse melons. They are the cutest thing, and they definitely are. They're an acquired taste, but they look like little watermelons, but kind of like a lemony cucumber taste. They're good, but acquired taste for sure. Put them in your Bloody Marys, or just set them out. They're kind of a novelty thing, but still pretty good. Well, not bad for a final harvest. I got 3 eggplant, a whole basket full of jalapenos, and a couple cups of the cherry tomatoes that I topped a few weeks ago. So now I want to tackle those winter squash. Now winter squash is different from summer squash because they take a lot longer to produce their fruit. And summer squash like zucchini and yellow squashes, they're so prolific, and they tend to be pretty big too, like winter squash. But I like to grow my vining, my bigger crops on hog panel trellises to take advantage of vertical space. And that's what I've done here with this variety. This is a variety called Autumn Frost, and it is the cutest little butternut squash I've ever seen. I can't vouch for the flavor yet. I'll let you know that at a later date. The winter squash can take anywhere from like 95 to 110 days from seed to maturity. And I had an issue with my winter squash this year because I would direct sow it like late May, and next thing you know, they'd germinate and they'd be decapitated. So I had the chipmunks coming in and just leveling them off as soon as they showed any signs of growth. So I had to sow them a few times, and so the third time was the charm. So I'm guesstimating that I'm probably right around that 110-day mark, and not all of the fruit on the vine is mature, so you don't have to pick it all at once. But I am going to pick the ones that are showing the signs of maturity. So like the brown stem compared to like the immature ones will still have a green stem. And then this particular variety will develop this really beautiful chalky kind of bluish cast to it, and all of these ripe ones have that coloring. So that's my cue to go ahead and pick. So this variety gets to be about 3 to 4 pounds at maturity too, so I would say that's probably where we're at. And the cool thing is I didn't sling these guys, so a lot of people recommend slinging your heavier fruits, and I don't think these guys are quite heavy enough to be a burden to the vine. At least the stem was strong enough to not need a sling. So it was one thing that I kind of skipped on and got lucky with. I'm going to go ahead and clip all the ones off that have a brown stem and that bluish chalky cast to them, and leave the other ones that are still looking immature on the vine, and hopefully they'll mature up before we get that hard frost, that first hard frost, usually right around October 15th. And you want to make sure that when you're cutting them, you're not going to carry them. You want to leave some stem on there. And boy, they are hard. Ooh! Look at this little guy. How cute is that? Ow! Oh. Gotta watch yourself. And this guy grew right between the tines, and I'm not going to get him out of there, so he's just going to spend the winter there. One more step. Now I've got to cure these guys so that I can keep them over winter as long as possible. And what that does is toughen the skin. So your winter squash you should not be able to pierce it with your fingernail. And it also sweetens them up. So if I were to eat these right now, the flavor would be probably okay, but not as good as if I were to let them cure out in the sun. So I'm going to leave them out on the pea gravel here in the vegetable garden for the next 2 weeks. And I'm going to turn them every couple days so that all of the skin is exposed to the sunlight. Sweetens them up, all those sugars concentrate within the flesh of the winter squash. And then once the curing process is finished, I can put them in a cool, dark spot probably in the basement, where I keep a lot of my stuff that I store. Throw those in the basement, and they'll keep for quite a long time, several months. We'll probably eat them up before they rot anyway. But for now, I'm going to just start piling them over here, lay them out, not really piling them, but I'm going to lay them out on the pea gravel and then turn them every couple days just so that they're evenly sunbathed. Now, if you don't have a spot to put it, you could always put it on a patio or on the sidewalk, anywhere there's going to be a good amount of sun to cover these guys. And if you've got rain coming, you can always move them in the house and dry them in a sunny window. Just give it several days, a couple weeks, so that it has time to toughen up, and then you'll be ready to store them. Look at all the roots that have gathered around the Oya. So this is an extra large Oya. They're a great way to water your vegetable garden without having to water constantly. And all you simply do is fill your Oya with water. And then the roots over time will start figuring out, okay, where's the water source? I put this between my zucchini and my golden griller squash. And I just have to be careful digging it out. Don't want to crack it. And the reason I'm digging it up is because it's made out of terracotta, and because my ground freezes, I'm zone 6A, formerly 5B, my ground freezes, and so I cannot leave this in the ground because the terracotta, it'll crack. All right, back to what I was saying about that Oya. I had to postpone filming, had some barking dog issues and some equipment issues, but we're back on track. So the Oya, I dug it out, and what I want to show you, I'm going to give you a close-up of that, is what this hole looks like where the Oya was. All of those roots have gravitated toward that space, and it was all of my squash roots. So all of them gravitated toward the moisture source, and it's just a tangle of roots in this hole, which is exactly what an Oya does. It waters whatever you have it planted. You could put it in your flower garden, wherever you need a water source and wherever you want to minimize how frequently you're watering. An Oya is a really great option, and I think for next year I'm going to add another one to this bed and maybe completely make this bed almost completely dependent on Oya for its moisture source. So now I want to move on to refreshing the soil, because after a long season of growing, and I've been growing in these beds since March, the soil is pretty depleted and I need to revive it. Let me show you what I do to revive that soil that doesn't cost you a penny. Now, this is one of my favorite things to do. I love to save all of my vegetable scraps. It's the very first thing I started doing when I realized I needed to start building soil, before I even made a garden around my home. So I used all my vegetable scraps, and this is a couple days worth of peels and cut up vegetables, old things, celery, all kinds of stuff, eggshells and coffee grounds and coffee filters, lots of stuff. And when I was just getting started, I didn't have a budget for a compost bin. I didn't have a compost pile. But what I did was I composted in place. It's also called dig and drop. So in areas that I knew I wanted to start my garden, I started with building soil. It all begins with the soil. So, and to make that happen, I dug holes everywhere and dropped my kitchen scraps in those holes. So all my vegetable peels, the only thing I didn't drop in the holes was anything fat-based or meats, stuff like that that would attract rodents. The only issue with this method, especially if you have a dog, is you want to be careful. I mean, if you've got a digging dog, and I had one of those, you have to keep an eye on the dog, because certain things when you dig and drop, like coffee grounds, grapes, onions, are poisonous to dogs. So you want to be mindful of that, because if you've got a digger, you don't want them eating that stuff. So just a word of caution on that regard. And then also, I used to drop rocks in areas where I knew I had just buried something, just as a reminder for me. So that's another thing to mark the spot. And all I'm doing is dropping this stuff in the ground, and I'm letting all the worms and all the microorganisms and all those good things that break down things in the soil and turn it into good soil, I let those do the work for me. So that was the very first thing I did to build my very first garden, and it works great. I still do it. So dig and drop, or composting in place, that's what it's called. And that's how I've built my soil. And what's really nice about this too is if you use the hugelkultur method, and hugelkultur method is just layering, like I did cardboard in my Vigo garden raised beds. I did a layer of cardboard, and then I did leaves and compost from my bins and food scraps, just to make the base level for my raised beds, the soil. But over time, all of those things break down, so that soil level naturally sinks, so you have to replenish the soil anyway. So I'll go in with my food scraps, dig holes this time of the year in the fall, drop in those scraps, and then top it all off with some store-bought compost too, because I don't have a composting operation big enough to top everything off in my garden. So I do a number of different things to replenish my soil, and digging and dropping or composting in place is one of those methods. Moldy bread works. Break it all up. Oof, plenty of spores in that. And then egg cartons, tearing them up and just digging little holes everywhere. Now you can see just how much this bed has sunken. This bed was originally filled to about here. I had about a 2-inch lip between the top of the soil and the top of the bed, and it's probably sunken about 5 inches, which is pretty totally normal when you're using the hugelkultur method, which means all of those first components you did when you did your lasagna of ingredients for your hugelkultur have broken down. They're doing exactly what they need to do. So I'm going to go in and top it off with some more, or bury some more good stuff. Soil is beautiful. I dropped a few eggshells in here that I hadn't baked, and normally I will bake those in the oven at about 400 degrees for about 10 minutes, because if you don't do that, those eggshells, the calcium that's in those eggshells and all that good stuff, it takes forever for eggshells to break down. It doesn't release what you want it to release into the soil. So by baking them, you want to have a window open though, because your house will stink pretty bad when you're baking your eggshells. And then they're really crumbly once you do that, and you can break them into your soil, and then they break down and they disperse all of those nutrients that are locked up in those beautiful shells. So, and I'm just dropping in like entire carbon, or their paper filters, coffee filters, all of that. You'll be surprised how quickly those worms will break all of this down and really replenish your soil. And you don't have to go and buy a compost tumbler or make a compost pile especially in a residential backyard. It's kind of difficult to make a large compost pile in a small space. So doing it this way is cost effective, and we all have vegetable and fruit scraps. And if you're a coffee drinker, eggs, all that stuff can all go back into your soil. Why waste it? And now that all of my kitchen scraps are buried, I'll come in and top all these beds off with a couple bags of store-bought compost. And my beds are ready for garlic planting, which usually happens right around Halloween. So I'll come in and do that. And if you're interested in how to do that, there's a link up above here to that video that I filmed a couple years ago on planting garlic in your raised beds. All right, guys, that's all for now. And thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.